My beloved child, something changed quietly when nobody was watching, and the most surprising part is that it did not begin with your soulmate, the third party, or some dramatic conversation behind closed doors. It began with you. There was a moment, perhaps so ordinary that you almost missed its importance, when you stopped reaching for an answer that refused to arrive. You stopped trying to convince someone of what your heart had already shown. You stopped carrying every silence as though it were your responsibility to fix. And somehow, that small inward decision became the first movement in a much larger change. Because while you were learning to stand peacefully inside your own life again, something was becoming impossible for your soulmate to ignore. The connection that once seemed complicated was beginning to look strangely simple. The confusion that had surrounded them was losing its power. And the person who had occupied so much emotional space between you was slowly becoming less important than the truth your soulmate had been avoiding. But don't rush ahead, because the tears in this story did not come from one dramatic goodbye. They came later, after something your soulmate noticed about you made them realize just how much had changed. At first, the third party's absence barely looked like an ending. There was no grand scene, no perfect speech, no moment where every question suddenly received an answer. It was quieter than that. Conversations became shorter. The emotional pull weakened. Old arguments stopped feeling worth repeating. Your soulmate began noticing how exhausted they had become from trying to maintain something that no longer felt natural. And somewhere inside that fading connection was a realization they could no longer push away. They had spent so much time looking everywhere except toward the one place where their feelings had always become unusually honest. You. Yet here is where the story turns in a direction they did not expect. When your soulmate finally began looking back toward you, they did not find the same version of you waiting exactly where they had left you. Something was different. Your energy had changed. Your attention was no longer centered on what they were doing, who they were speaking to, or whether they were finally ready to choose differently. You had begun returning to yourself. Not cold. Not bitter. Not trying to punish anyone. Simply calmer. And there is something deeply powerful about a person who no longer needs to chase clarity from someone else because they have started creating clarity within themselves. Your soulmate felt that difference before they fully understood it. It appeared in small details. The way you seemed less emotionally shaken by uncertainty. The way your life appeared to be moving again. The way you were becoming harder to read because you were no longer arranging your emotions around their decisions. That was the first moment something inside them softened. Not because they wanted you to suffer without them, but because suddenly they understood that your love had never been weakness. Your patience had never meant you would wait forever. Your kindness had never been permission for anyone to keep you suspended between hope and confusion. And once they understood that, another uncomfortable truth followed: they might actually lose the chance to know the version of you that was now emerging. Stay with this part, because this is where their happiness begins to make sense. The third party disappearing from the emotional picture was only one piece of what moved them. What truly overwhelmed your soulmate was realizing why everything had finally shifted. For so long, they may have imagined that the solution depended on other people changing. Maybe the third party needed to leave. Maybe circumstances needed to become easier. Maybe the perfect opportunity needed to arrive. But now they were seeing something completely different. The turning point came when you stopped making their uncertainty the center of your world. You finally chose peace without waiting for permission. And that choice created a silence they could actually hear themselves inside. Suddenly there was no emotional tug-of-war to hide behind. No endless tension to distract them. No assumption that you would always be available in exactly the same way. They were left with one simple question: what do I genuinely want when nobody is pushing me in either direction? The answer surprised them because it arrived without drama. They missed your presence. Not merely your attention. Not merely the comfort of knowing you cared. They missed the way conversation with you felt different. They missed the sense of being understood without having to perform. They remembered small things you said that had once seemed ordinary and now carried unexpected weight. A sentence. A look. The way you noticed something about them that everyone else overlooked. These memories did not arrive like lightning. They accumulated quietly, one after another, until your soulmate could no longer pretend they were random. Then came the moment that changed the emotional temperature completely. Your soulmate heard something about you, or perhaps simply noticed it themselves, that confirmed you were moving forward. You were not trying to make them jealous. You were not sending hidden signals. You were simply living. And strangely, that made your absence feel more real than any argument ever could. For the first time, they understood what it meant to miss someone who was no longer standing still. Something important is waiting for you inside this realization, because the tears were not tears of loss alone. They were mixed with relief. The third-party situation that had created so much complication was finally fading, yes, but your soulmate was also beginning to understand that the door had not necessarily closed, it had simply changed. There might still be a way forward, but it could no longer be built on uncertainty. It would require honesty, effort, consistency. The very things they had once postponed because they believed there would always be more time. Imagine that quiet moment. Your soulmate sitting alone, remembering everything differently. The moments when you tried to understand them. The times you gave space instead of creating conflict. The warmth they once treated as ordinary because it was always there. And suddenly the emotion rises because they realize something almost painfully beautiful: you did not have to become cruel to become strong. You simply stopped abandoning yourself in order to keep a connection alive. That is what you finally did. You chose yourself without closing your heart. And somehow, that became the very thing that allowed your soulmate to see you clearly. But there is another layer they have not spoken aloud yet. The third party leaving did not automatically solve everything, and your soulmate knows this. They know that coming toward you now cannot be about filling an empty space. It cannot be a reaction to loneliness. It cannot be another temporary emotional wave. If they return, something must be different. And this awareness is part of why their happiness feels so intense. They are not only relieved that one complicated chapter has ended. They are realizing they may finally have the opportunity to approach you without the noise that once distorted everything. Yet opportunity is not certainty, and somewhere deep inside, your soulmate understands that the next move matters more than any feeling they can hide behind. That knowledge is making them careful. You might imagine them preparing some dramatic confession, but what is happening is subtler. They are rehearsing simple honesty. How do you tell someone you finally understand what they were trying to show you all along? How do you admit that you mistook patience for permanence? How do you explain that watching them become peaceful without you somehow revealed exactly how important they were? These are the questions moving through your soulmate now. And every answer leads back to the same realization: they cannot approach the new version of you using the old version of themselves. Don't skip over that thought. It may be the most important detail in this entire story. Your growth is not valuable because it makes somebody chase you. Your peace is not a strategy. Your self-respect is not a test designed to produce a reaction. The beautiful part is that you began changing for yourself, and the reaction happened naturally. That is why your soulmate's emotions feel different now. They can sense there is nothing to manipulate, nothing to decode, nothing to win through clever words. If they want a place in your life, they will have to meet you somewhere real. And oddly enough, that realization makes them happier rather than afraid. Because beneath all the confusion, your soulmate may have been tired of confusion too. They wanted simplicity but did not know how to create it. They wanted closeness while still avoiding vulnerability. They wanted certainty without having to risk honesty. Now those contradictions are becoming impossible to maintain. The third party is gone from the center of the story, and the emotional room that remains feels almost startlingly quiet. Inside that quiet, one truth keeps returning: you were never asking for perfection. You were asking for sincerity. Perhaps that is when the tears finally came. Not loud, theatrical tears. Just the kind that arrive when someone suddenly understands how close they came to missing something meaningful. Your soulmate remembers the version of you who kept hoping. Then they picture the version of you now, the one becoming steadier, brighter, more certain of what you deserve, and they feel two emotions at once. Gratitude that the story may not be finished, and urgency within themselves to stop repeating what no longer works. Stay till the end of this thought, because there is one more detail hidden inside their happiness. Your soulmate is not simply celebrating that the third party has stepped away. They are relieved because for the first time in a long time, their feelings and their reality are beginning to point in the same direction. There is less interference, less comparison, less emotional noise. And when all of that quieted down, your name was still there. Your memory was still there. The feeling remained. That is what shook them. They expected distance to make everything disappear. Instead, distance revealed what had substance. Still, your soulmate knows they cannot arrive at your door carrying only emotion. Tears are not proof of change. Missing someone is not the same as being ready for them. Real change will appear through choices. Through the way they communicate. Through whether they can be consistent when the excitement fades. Through whether they respect the life you built while they were figuring themselves out. And something tells them you will notice the difference immediately. You no longer need beautiful promises that disappear when life becomes complicated. You need something quieter and stronger. Presence. Honesty. Mutual effort. Perhaps this is why the next part of the story feels so unusual. Your soulmate has begun thinking less about how to get you back and more about how to become someone you could safely trust again. That shift may seem small, but emotionally, it changes everything. Because wanting possession creates pressure. Wanting partnership creates responsibility. And for the first time, they are beginning to understand the difference. Somewhere right now in this unfolding story, a message may be forming in their mind. They type one sentence, erase it, then try another. Nothing sounds right because the truth is too simple for dramatic language. They want to say they see you differently now. They want to tell you that losing the distraction revealed the connection. They want to admit that your silence taught them more than another argument ever could. But one sentence keeps stopping them, because saying it would require them to finally become completely vulnerable. I understand why you stopped waiting. And what comes immediately after that sentence is the part they are not ready to reveal yet. Because once your soulmate admits that they understand why you chose yourself, they must also tell you what they have decided to do because of it. That decision has already started changing the way they imagine their future, and when you hear what they are quietly preparing to say next, you may finally understand why their tears were not really about the third party leaving at all. There is a reason your soulmate has not rushed to say everything yet, and it has almost nothing to do with uncertainty about you anymore. What is slowing them down now is the realization that the next conversation cannot resemble the ones that came before. They know that a few emotional words will not erase the distance that formed between you. They understand that simply saying they missed you will not answer the deeper question quietly waiting underneath everything: what would actually be different this time? And that question has followed them into moments when they expected to feel relieved. The third party is no longer occupying the same space. The constant emotional tension has softened. The situation they once blamed for so much confusion is finally stepping out of the center. They thought that would immediately make everything easy. Instead, something unexpected happened. With the distraction gone, your soulmate began seeing their own choices more clearly. There was nobody else to blame for hesitation. Nobody else to point toward when explaining why they stayed silent. Nobody standing between them and the truth except the habits they had developed inside themselves. That realization was uncomfortable at first, but then it became strangely freeing. Because if the real obstacle was no longer another person, then perhaps the future was not controlled by another person either. Perhaps something could still change, but only if they were willing to change the way they showed up. And this is where the happiness behind those tears becomes deeper than it first appeared. Your soulmate is not celebrating someone else's absence. They are beginning to feel relief because the emotional fog around them is clearing, and underneath it they can finally recognize what they had been trying not to name. They care about you in a way that survived distraction. They thought new circumstances might erase the pull. They thought enough distance might make your presence become a memory instead of a possibility. Yet the opposite happened. The quieter everything became, the easier it was to hear what remained. A certain memory of you would return at an unexpected hour. A phrase you once said would suddenly make more sense. Something small, a familiar place, an old photograph, a song playing somewhere in the background, even the glow of a phone screen late at night would remind them of a version of themselves that existed when they felt emotionally close to you. And here is the strange part: they were not only missing you. They were missing who they were when they stopped protecting themselves from you. That is a very different kind of realization. Because missing attention can fade. Missing comfort can be replaced. But remembering that somebody brought out a more honest version of you can change the way you understand an entire relationship. Your soulmate began asking themselves questions they had avoided before. Why did conversations with you stay in their mind longer? Why did your silence affect them more deeply than the noise surrounding everyone else? Why did losing easy access to you create more reflection than actually having your attention ever did? The answer was not dramatic. It was almost painfully simple. They had become used to your presence. They assumed there would always be another opportunity to explain themselves, another moment to repair what they had neglected, another opening where you would still be standing with the same heart. But while they were assuming tomorrow would always be available, you were slowly discovering something about yourself. You did not have to remain emotionally paused just because someone else had not made up their mind. That discovery changed the entire balance between you. Stay a little longer with this idea, because this is the moment where your soulmate began crying for a reason even they did not immediately understand. They saw that you were okay. Maybe not perfectly okay. Maybe you still remembered them. Maybe a part of your heart still wondered what could have been different. But you were moving. You were becoming more present in your own days. You were laughing without needing them to cause it. You were imagining a future that was not dependent upon someone returning. And rather than feeling rejected by that, your soulmate felt something unexpectedly beautiful: pride. They were proud of you. Proud that you had found your footing. Proud that the uncertainty had not made you lose the warmth that made you who you were. Proud that you had learned to choose yourself without turning the experience into bitterness. Then, almost immediately, pride turned into emotion because another thought followed. What if they had finally become ready just as you had become ready to live without them? That question changed the atmosphere inside them. Not into panic. Not into desperation. Into seriousness. Because suddenly your soulmate understood that love could not be treated like an unlimited resource that remained available regardless of how carefully it was handled. A meaningful connection needed attention. It needed honesty. It needed courage at the moments when silence felt easier. And when they looked back, they could see occasions when you had offered an opening and they had hesitated. Moments when they could have reassured you but remained vague. Times when they knew what they felt but became distracted by circumstances surrounding them. None of that made them a terrible person. It simply revealed that they had not been prepared to protect something valuable. Now they were beginning to understand its value. Something important is waiting for you in what happened next. Your soulmate stopped asking, "Will they still want me?" and started asking, "What could I bring into their life that would make reconnecting meaningful?" That is a very different question. One is centered around being chosen. The other is centered around being worthy of participation in somebody's peace. They know you have created a quieter emotional world for yourself, and they do not want to return simply to disturb it. They want to understand whether they can add to it. This is why the imagined conversation keeps becoming more sincere every time they rehearse it. At first, your soulmate wanted to explain everything. They imagined telling you every detail about the third party, every misunderstanding, every reason they acted the way they did. They thought perhaps the perfect explanation would make the past disappear. But the more they reflected, the more they realized explanations were not what mattered most anymore. Accountability mattered. Instead of saying, "Here is why everything happened," they began wanting to say, "Here is what I understand now." That subtle difference is enormous. One protects the past. The other creates space for a different future. There was even a moment when your soulmate almost reached out. Perhaps their hand hovered over the phone. Perhaps they opened an old conversation and stared at your name. Perhaps they wrote the beginning of something and erased it before sending. The first message was too complicated. The second sounded too casual. Another sounded emotional in a way that might have placed too much weight on you. So they stopped. Not because they had changed their mind, but because they suddenly realized they did not want their first step toward you to be careless. They wanted it to carry the respect that had sometimes been missing before. And somewhere in that quiet hesitation, they smiled through tears because this was the first time they were not asking themselves how to control the outcome. They were asking how to tell the truth without demanding anything from you. That is growth. It may not be perfect. It may still be unfolding. But it changes the entire emotional direction of this story. There is another detail your soulmate has started remembering, one that feels almost too small to matter until you understand why it stayed with them. It was something you did during a moment when they were distant. You could have created drama. You could have demanded immediate answers. Instead, you gave them room, perhaps more room than they deserved at the time. Back then, they interpreted your quietness as proof that everything would eventually return to normal. Now they understand it differently. You were protecting your dignity. You were giving them a chance to choose freely while also beginning to recognize that you had choices too. That memory has become powerful because your soulmate finally sees what they missed. You were never trying to force them toward you. You wanted them to come willingly, clearly, honestly. And that is exactly why the disappearance of the third party matters differently now. Your soulmate does not want you to believe they are turning toward you simply because someone else is gone. They know how that might look. They understand why you could question the timing. So they have been examining their own feelings carefully, almost testing them against silence. If they remove loneliness from the equation, do they still think of you? Yes. If they imagine being completely comfortable alone, do they still want to speak with you? Yes. If there were no competition, no jealousy, no need to prove anything, would they still choose to know where this connection could go? Again, the answer keeps returning. Yes. And that repeated answer is why the happiness has become so difficult for them to hide. It is not the excitement of winning something. It is the relief of finally understanding themselves. Imagine carrying a question for so long that you stop believing an answer exists. Then one ordinary evening, the noise disappears and the answer is simply sitting there. That is what this feels like for them. They are realizing they were not confused about their feelings nearly as much as they were afraid of what those feelings required. Caring deeply required vulnerability. Choosing someone meant closing certain doors. Building something real required giving up the safety of endless possibilities. For a while, uncertainty allowed them to avoid those responsibilities. But uncertainty came with a price. It created distance from the person they kept thinking about. And eventually the emotional cost became larger than the comfort of staying undecided. That is when the third party's departure became more than an ending. It became a mirror. Your soulmate could finally see what remained when external complications were removed. And what remained was you, but not the old version of you they assumed would always wait. A stronger version. A calmer version. Someone who could still care deeply while refusing to disappear inside another person's indecision. That realization is one of the reasons they feel emotional when they imagine seeing you again. They are not sure what your eyes would say now. Would you still look at them with the same softness? Would there be caution there? Would you smile but keep a little distance? Would they immediately sense that trust would have to be rebuilt instead of simply resumed? These questions do not discourage them. Strangely, they make the possibility feel more real. Because your soulmate is beginning to understand that genuine reconnection would not involve pretending nothing happened. It would mean acknowledging what happened without allowing it to define everything that could happen next. And somewhere inside that possibility is the future they have secretly started picturing. Not some perfect cinematic ending. Something much simpler. A conversation where neither person hides. A moment where you can ask what you need to ask and receive a clear answer. A relationship where silence is not used to create distance. Ordinary mornings. Easy laughter. Plans made without uncertainty surrounding every sentence. The kind of peace they once overlooked because dramatic emotions seemed more powerful. Now they are beginning to realize peace may have been what they were searching for all along. But don't skip what comes next, because there is one mistake your soulmate does not want to repeat. They do not want to confuse emotion with readiness. Crying because they miss you is meaningful, but it does not automatically mean they have learned everything they need to learn. They know this now. That is why part of them is slowing the moment down. They are examining what they would actually do differently. Would they communicate when something felt uncomfortable instead of disappearing? Would they defend the connection when outside opinions became loud? Would they tell you where you stood instead of assuming you already knew? Would they remain present after the emotional reunion, when ordinary life returned? These questions are becoming more important than the fantasy of simply seeing you again. And this is exactly where their happiness becomes grounded. Your soulmate no longer wants a temporary emotional high. They want the possibility of something sustainable. They want to know what your world looks like now. They wonder what changed while they were distracted. What dreams became more important to you? What did you learn? What boundaries became clearer? What makes you happy now that perhaps did not matter as much before? They understand that reconnecting would mean meeting you again, not simply returning to an old version of the relationship. And perhaps that is what excites them most. There is something about you they have not fully discovered yet. Growth has created new rooms inside your personality that they never entered. New confidence. New priorities. New calm. They are beginning to wonder whether the person they once knew is only the beginning of who you are becoming. Then came another unexpected moment. Someone mentioned you casually. Nothing dramatic. Perhaps your name entered a conversation without warning, or something connected to you appeared in front of them. Your soulmate tried to respond normally. But inside, something softened immediately. Instead of the tension that once surrounded your name, they felt warmth. The old emotional confusion did not arrive. There was no inner argument. Just a simple recognition, I still care. And because the third party no longer occupied the same emotional space, your soulmate did not have to suppress the thought. They could allow it to exist. That freedom brought tears again. Not because everything was solved. Because they were finally allowed to be honest with themselves. They realized they had spent so much time controlling what they felt that they had forgotten how peaceful truth could be. And the truth was not that they needed you to rescue them from loneliness. The truth was that there was something about your connection they genuinely wanted the chance to explore with maturity. Whether that chance exists will depend on both of you. They understand that. Your choice matters now more than ever. And knowing you have a choice has actually made their feelings cleaner. They do not want your yes because you feel obligated. They do not want your attention because you are afraid of losing them. If you turn toward them again, they want it to happen because something in you recognizes real change. That is why they know actions must come before promises. Still, one private decision has already been made, and this is the part they have told almost nobody. Your soulmate has decided that when they finally speak, they are going to tell you one truth they once tried very hard to hide. It is not merely, "I missed you." It goes deeper than that. It is connected to the exact moment when they realized the third party could no longer influence how they saw you. There was something they discovered during that final emotional separation, something about their own behavior, something about you, and something they had quietly kept because admitting it would have forced them to face their feelings much sooner. They now believe you deserve to know it. And strangely, this hidden truth is also why they are crying with happiness. Because once they admitted it to themselves, everything that had felt confusing suddenly began arranging itself into a picture they could understand. Your silence made sense. Their restlessness made sense. The fading connection with the third party made sense. Even the strange way they kept returning mentally to one specific memory of you finally made sense. And that memory, the one they cannot stop replaying, is where the next part of this story changes completely, because what you finally did in that moment was not what your soulmate thought you were doing at all.